Takeshi Yamamoto crouched behind a moss-covered log, his rifle trembling in his hands. Not from fear, from hunger. The Imperial Japanese Army sergeant had not eaten in 4 days. Around him, 17 men lay scattered across the jungle floor, some breathing, some not. The Burma Campaign had turned into something no one had predicted. It was May 1944, and the radio had been silent for 3 weeks. The morning mist clung to the canopy above like a shroud. Yamamoto wiped the sweat from his forehead with a hand that looked skeletal. He had lost nearly 20 kilograms since the retreat from Imphal began. The monsoon rains had destroyed their supply lines. The British and Indian forces had pushed them back, kilometer by kilometer, into this green hell where the jungle itself seemed determined to kill them. Private Hiroshi Tanaka crawled toward him, his uniform torn and stained with mud and something darker. Blood. Perhaps his own, perhaps not. Tanaka's eyes had that hollow look Yamamoto had seen before, the look of a man who had already decided he was dead. "Sergeant," Tanaka whispered, his voice barely audible over the constant drip of water from leaves above. "We found something." Yamamoto followed him through the undergrowth. Every step required concentration. His boots, once proud symbols of the Emperor's army, were falling apart. Fungi grew between his toes. 2 of his men had already died from infections that started as simple cuts. In this humidity, wounds never healed. They only festered. They reached a small clearing where 3 other soldiers waited. Corporal Kenji Sato stood over something on the ground. A British soldier, young, maybe 19 years old, dead for perhaps 2 days. The body had not yet begun to decompose in the way bodies did here, swelling and bursting in the heat. "He has rations," Sato said, not looking at Yamamoto, "and ammunition. Different caliber, but we could trade with the Burmese villagers if we find any." Yamamoto knelt beside the body. The British soldier's eyes were still open, staring at nothing. Someone should close them, Yamamoto thought, but he did not. Instead, he searched the man's pack. 4 tins of bully beef, a canteen still half full, a letter, unfinished, addressed to someone named Margaret. "Take everything useful," Yamamoto ordered. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, mechanical, empty, but as his men stripped the corpse, Yamamoto found himself reading the letter. The British soldier had been writing about the rain, about missing home, about a girl who worked in a factory in Manchester. The handwriting was careful, almost childlike. The soldier had been educated enough to write, but not enough to avoid the grammar mistakes that dotted the page. Yamamoto folded the letter and placed it back in the British soldier's pocket. Some part of him, the part that still remembered the poetry his father had taught him, the part that had once believed in the beauty of sacrifice, insisted on this small dignity. They divided the rations. Each man received half a tin. It was gone in seconds. The water they shared more carefully, each man allowing himself only 2 swallows. Yamamoto took his portion last, as a commander should, and it tasted like rust and salvation. "Sergeant," Lieutenant Yoshida approached from the perimeter. Yoshida had been a teacher before the war, literature and history at a school in Kyoto. Now he looked like a scarecrow dressed in military uniform. "We need to discuss our situation." They moved away from the others. Yoshida's eyes, once bright with intelligence and idealism, now held something else. Calculation, desperation. "We have no contact with division headquarters," Yoshida said quietly. "No supplies, no reinforcements. Half the men have dysentery. Nakamura died last night. His fever never broke." Yamamoto nodded. He had held Nakamura as the young soldier convulsed and died, calling for his mother. Nakamura had been 20 years old. "The men are asking questions," Yoshida continued. "They want to know what we're fighting for. We're not defending a position. We're not attacking an objective. We're just dying slowly in this jungle." "We have our orders," Yamamoto said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "We retreat to the Chindwin River. We regroup with the main force." "The Chindwin is 60 kilometers away," Yoshida replied. "Through enemy territory, through jungle where the British have air superiority and local support. With 17 men, most of whom can barely walk. Sergeant, we both know we'll never reach it." Yamamoto looked at the ground. An ant was dragging something 3 times its size across a leaf. Determined, mindless, doomed. "What are you suggesting, Lieutenant?" Yoshida was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Surrender." The word hung between them like a physical thing. Surrender. It was a concept so foreign, so antithetical to everything they had been taught, that for a moment Yamamoto could not even process it. Japanese soldiers did not surrender. To surrender was to abandon honor, to betray the emperor, to disgrace one's family for generations. Better death, better seppuku, better anything than surrender. "You know what that word means," Yamamoto said coldly. "You know what we are taught." "I know what we are taught," Yoshida said, and now there was anger in his voice. Quiet anger, but anger nonetheless. "I taught it myself, to children who believed every word. Loyalty unto death, honor above life. But Sergeant, look at us. Look at what we've become. We're not fighting. We're just dying, slowly, painfully. And for what? For a battle that's already lost. For a war that—" He stopped himself. "Finish your thought, Lieutenant." Yoshida met his eyes. "For a war that Japan is losing." Yamamoto's hand moved to his katana before he could stop himself. To speak of defeat was treason, to even think it was weakness, but his hand stopped, because deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, Yamamoto knew Yoshida was right. The Burma Campaign was a disaster. The operation to invade India had failed catastrophically. Tens of thousands dead, more dying every day. Supply lines severed, divisions scattered. The British and Indian forces were not just defending anymore, they were hunting. "Even if what you say is true," Yamamoto said slowly, "surrender is impossible. You know this. Seppuku is always possible." Yoshida said quietly. "That is the honorable path, is it not?" "But Sergeant, I have been thinking about honor. I have been thinking about what it means. Is there honor in leading these men to certain death? Is there honor in refusing to acknowledge reality? Or is honor sometimes found in survival? In living to see our families again? In choosing life over a meaningless death in a forgotten jungle?" These were dangerous thoughts. Yoshida was speaking heresy, but he was also speaking truth, and that made it more dangerous still. "The men," Yamamoto asked, "divided. Tanaka and Sato still believe they would choose death, but others. Corporal Ito asked me yesterday if his wife would receive his pension if he died here. He has 3 daughters, Sergeant. 3 little girls who will grow up without a father if we continue this way." Yamamoto closed his eyes. He saw his own daughter, Yuki, 5 years old when he left. She would be 7 now. Did she remember his face? Did she understand why he had gone? His wife, Akiko, had been pregnant when he departed. He did not even know if he had a son or another daughter. "I need to think," Yamamoto said. "We don't have time to think. Every day we wait, more men die. Yesterday it was Nakamura. Today Kimura can barely stand. Tomorrow—" I said, "I need to think, Lieutenant." Yoshida bowed slightly and withdrew. Yamamoto stood alone in the jungle, surrounded by the sounds of life that cared nothing for human struggles. Birds called, insects buzzed, water dripped endlessly from 1,000 leaves. He thought about his father, who had served in Manchuria. His father had taught him Bushido, the way of the warrior. Loyalty, courage, honor. But his father had also taught him something else, something he had said one night when he was drunk on sake and melancholy. "Honor is not always loud, Takeshi. Sometimes honor is quiet. Sometimes honor is knowing when to bend so that you do not break." At the time, young Takeshi had not understood. Now, starving and dying in a Burmese jungle, he thought perhaps he was beginning to. That evening, as darkness fell over the jungle like a heavy blanket, Yamamoto called his men together. 17 faces, gaunt and hollow, looked at him with what remained of their trust. These men had followed him through hell. They had obeyed every order without question. They deserved truth. "Our situation is grave," Yamamoto began. Simple words, direct. "We are cut off from our division. We have no supplies. We have no support. Every day, our strength diminishes. The men were silent. They knew all this. They were living it. We have three options, Yamamoto continued. First, we continue toward the Chindwin River. This is a distance of 60 kilometers through enemy territory. Given our current condition, many of us will die on this march. Perhaps all of us. Still silence. But he saw understanding in their eyes. Second, we can perform the seppuku. We can die here with honor, according to the code we have sworn to uphold. Our families will receive word that we died as warriors should die, loyal to the emperor unto death. Now there was movement. Tanaka nodded slightly. Sato's hand moved to his own blade. But others, like Corporal Ito, looked at the ground. Third, Yamamoto paused. This was the moment. Once these words were spoken, there was no taking them back. Third, we can surrender to British forces. We can become prisoners of war. We can live, though we live without honor. The reaction was immediate. Tanaka stood up, anger flashing across his face. Surrender? Sergeant, you cannot be serious. We are soldiers of the Emperor. We do not surrender. Sit down, Private, Yamamoto said quietly, but with absolute authority. Tanaka sat, but his anger remained. I present these options not because I advocate for any particular one, Yamamoto continued. I present them because you deserve to know what choices remain to us. Each man must decide for himself what honor means, what duty requires, what his family needs. The choice is clear, Sato said. We fight on until we reach our lines, or we die trying. There is no third option. Surrender is not an option for Japanese soldiers. Then you advocate for certain death? Lieutenant Yoshida asked. Because that is what the first option means. We will die. Not in battle, not heroically. We will die of disease, of starvation, picked off one by enemy patrols or the jungle itself. Better that than shame, Tanaka shouted. Is it shame to want to see your family again? Corporal Ito said quietly. His voice was so soft that everyone had to lean in to hear him. Is it shame to want to hold your daughter, to teach your son, to grow old with your wife? He looked up and there were tears in his eyes. I believe in the Emperor. I believe in Japan. But I also believe that a father's duty is to his children. And if I die here, in this forgotten place, what good does my honor do them? Your honor is all you have, Tanaka insisted. Your honor is what you pass to your children. What will you tell them if you surrender? That their father was a coward? That their father chose to live in shame rather than die with dignity? I would tell them that their father chose to come home, Ito said simply. The argument continued, voices rising. Yamamoto let it happen. These men needed to speak. They needed to wrestle with this impossible choice. Finally, when the arguing had exhausted itself, Yamamoto spoke again. We will vote. Each man will decide. Those who wish to attempt to reach the Chindwin, we will go together. Those who wish to perform seppuku, we will honor your choice and assist you as tradition requires. Those who wish to surrender, we will approach British lines under white flag. A vote? Tanaka said, incredulous. This is not a democracy, Sergeant. We are soldiers. You command. We obey. I will not command men to certain death without their consent, Yamamoto said. Not anymore. Each of you has earned the right to choose your own fate. They voted by moving to different parts of the clearing. It was not anonymous. Each man had to physically declare his choice in front of his comrades. 8 men, including Tanaka and Sato, moved to the side that represented continuing the march to the Chindwin. 5 men, led by Corporal Ito, moved to the side that represented surrender. 3 men stood in the middle, representing seppuku. One of them was Lieutenant Yoshida. Yamamoto had not voted. As commander, he would follow the majority. But seeing Yoshida stand with those who chose death tore something inside him. Lieutenant, Yamamoto asked quietly. Yoshida smiled sadly. I cannot surrender, Sergeant. I cannot live with that shame. I'm a teacher. I taught young men about honor, about sacrifice, about duty. If I surrender now, everything I taught becomes a lie. But I also cannot ask others to die for my principles, so this is my choice. I will die here with honor, and those who wish to survive can do so with my blessing. Yoshida, It is decided, Sergeant. Tonight, after we have eaten our last meal together, I and the others who have chosen this path will perform the ritual. We ask only that you act as our kaishakunin to ensure our deaths are clean. The kaishakunin was the second in a seppuku ritual, the one who would behead the person performing seppuku to ensure a quick death rather than prolonged agony. It was an honor to be asked, and a burden Yamamoto had never wished to bear. That night, they ate the last of the British rations. They shared stories of home, of families, of lives they had lived before the war. Lieutenant Yoshida recited poetry, beautiful verses about cherry blossoms and the impermanence of life. His voice was clear and strong, and for a moment it was possible to forget they were dying in a jungle thousands of kilometers from home. When the time came, Yoshida and the two others who had chosen seppuku prepared themselves. They bathed in a stream, as much as was possible in the jungle. They dressed in the cleanest uniforms they had. They wrote final letters to their families, though no one knew if these letters would ever be delivered. Yamamoto had performed this duty once before, for a captain who had been captured and tortured by Chinese resistance fighters. The captain had been rescued, but had chosen death to restore his honor. That had been different. That had been clear. This felt wrong in ways Yamamoto could not articulate. Yoshida knelt first. His hands were steady as he opened his uniform jacket, exposing his abdomen. He held his knife, a short blade he had carried since the beginning of the war. "Sergeant," Yoshida said quietly, "I ask you to remember something. Honor is not monolithic. There is honor in my choice, but there is also honor in theirs." He gestured toward the men who had chosen surrender. "Do not let anyone tell them they are cowards. It takes a different kind of courage to choose life when you have been taught to worship death." "I will remember, Lieutenant." Yoshida nodded. Then, with a steady hand, he plunged the knife into his abdomen and drew it across. His face contorted in pain, but he made no sound. Yamamoto raised his katana and brought it down in one clean motion. Yoshida's head fell forward, and it was done. The other two men followed. Private Matsuda went quietly, his face serene, almost peaceful. Lance Corporal Hayashi cried as he made the cut, tears streaming down his face, but he completed the ritual. Yamamoto performed his duty as kaishakunin for both, and with each stroke he felt a piece of himself die as well. They buried the three men as best they could in the jungle soil. It was shallow, and Yamamoto knew that wild animals would likely disturb the graves, but it was all they could offer. The camp was silent that night. 13 men remained. 8 who would continue toward the Chindwin. 5 who would seek surrender, and Yamamoto, who had still not declared which group he would join. In the early morning, before dawn, Yamamoto walked to the edge of the camp. The jungle was alive with sound, indifferent to human tragedy. He thought about Yoshida's last words. Different kinds of courage, different kinds of honor. He thought about his daughter, Yuki. 7 years old now. Would she even recognize him if he returned? And his wife, and the child he had never met, a son or daughter growing up without a father. He thought about the emperor, about Japan, about all the propaganda he had been fed and had fed to others. Die for the emperor. Honor above life. Never surrender. But what honor was there in abandoning your children? What loyalty was there in choosing death when life remained possible? Tanaka found him at dawn. The young private's face was hard, determined. "Sergeant, we are preparing to move toward the Chindwin. Will you lead us?" Yamamoto looked at him. Tanaka was barely 22 years old. He believed everything he had been taught with the fervor of youth. He had not yet learned that the world was more complicated than the songs they sang about glory and sacrifice. "No, Private, I will not." Tanaka's face fell. "Then you will surrender." "I will live," Yamamoto said simply. "I will find a way home to my family. Whether that is through surrender, through escape, through some other means, I do not know, but I will not march toward certain death in the name of honor. Not anymore." "Then you are a coward," Tanaka said, and there was genuine grief in his voice. "I looked up to you, Sergeant. I believed you were a true warrior." "Perhaps I am a coward," Yamamoto agreed. "Or perhaps I am finally learning what it means to be a man rather than just a soldier. I hope you survive, Tanaka. I hope you reach the Chindwin." I hope you make it home, but I cannot follow you down that path." Tanaka bowed stiffly and walked away. Yamamoto watched him go and felt the weight of judgment, of shame, of breaking with everything he had been taught to believe. But underneath that weight, there was something else, something that felt almost like relief. The camp divided. 8 men, led by Tanaka and Sato, gathered their meager supplies and prepared to move north toward the Chindwin River. They did not say goodbye to those who remained. To acknowledge them would be to acknowledge that surrender was a choice, and they could not accept that. Yamamoto watched them disappear into the jungle. Sato looked back once, his face unreadable, and then he too was gone. Yamamoto wondered if he would ever know what became of them. Probably not. Probably they would die somewhere in that green hell, and their bodies would never be found, and their families would receive only official letters saying they had died heroically in service to the emperor. 5 men remained with Yamamoto, Corporal Ito, and 4 others. They looked at him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "What now, Sergeant?" Ito asked. "Now we find British lines," Yamamoto said. "We approach under white flag. We surrender, and we pray they treat us with the mercy our own army would never show them." They fashioned a white flag from a torn undershirt tied to a bamboo pole. It looked pathetic, makeshift, but it was all they had. They cached their weapons, keeping only their personal items and identification papers. The march toward British lines took 2 days. They moved carefully, watching for patrols, listening for sounds of human activity. On the 2nd day, they heard voices speaking English. Yamamoto raised the white flag high. His hands were shaking. This was the moment. This was the point of no return. Once they showed themselves, there was no going back. Surrender was permanent, shameful, final. But as he stepped into the clearing, as British, soldiers raised their rifles and shouted at him to stop. As he and his men knelt on the ground with their hands behind their heads, Yamamoto felt something unexpected. He felt hope. The British soldiers were professional, almost kind. They searched the Japanese soldiers for weapons, gave them water, offered them cigarettes. An officer, young and tired-looking, spoke broken Japanese. "You are prisoners now. You will be taken to a camp. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Do you understand?" Yamamoto nodded. He understood. He was alive. He was a prisoner. He was dishonored. But he was alive. In the prisoner of war camp, Yamamoto learned that the Burma Campaign had indeed ended in disaster for Japan. The invasion of India had failed. Tens of thousands had died. The survivors were scattered, most dead or captured. Of the 8 men who had marched toward the Chindwin with Tanaka, only 2 would eventually be found. The rest simply vanished into the jungle. Yamamoto would spend the rest of the war in that camp. He would live to see Japan's surrender in 1945. He would return home to Kyoto to find his wife and 2 daughters. The child born while he was away was named Sakura, and she had her mother's smile. His homecoming was not celebrated. He was marked as a man who had surrendered, who had chosen life over honor. Some neighbors would not speak to his family. His father refused. At gatherings, people would whisper, but his daughters knew their father. His wife had her husband back. And late at night, when Yamamoto held his youngest daughter and felt her heartbeat against his chest, he knew he had made the right choice. Years later, an old man now, Yamamoto would meet Sato by chance on a train in Tokyo. Sato had survived somehow, had made it back. They recognized each other instantly despite the decades. They spoke quietly, carefully, about the jungle, about the choices they had made. Sato had never forgiven himself for the men he had led to their deaths. He had nightmares still. He drank too much. His wife had left him. "You were right, Sergeant," Sato said quietly as the train rattled through the city. "You were right to surrender. I was too proud to see it then. Too young, too stupid. But you were right." Yamamoto shook his head. "There was no right choice, Corporal. Only impossible choices. You chose honor as you understood it. I chose life. Both choices cost something. Both choices carried shame and grief. But we survived, and perhaps that is enough." They parted at the next station. 2 old soldiers who had once stood in a jungle and chosen different paths through hell. Yamamoto watched Sato disappear into the crowd and felt a profound sadness for all the young men who had been forced to make such choices, who had been told that honor required death, who had never been given permission to choose life. That night, Yamamoto sat with his grandchildren and told them stories. Not about war, not about honor or shame or impossible choices. Just stories about growing up in Kyoto, about fishing in streams, about the cherry blossoms that bloomed every spring. His granddaughter, named Yuki after his oldest daughter, asked him if he had been brave during the war. Yamamoto thought about Yoshida, who had chosen death, about Tanaka, who had marched into the jungle never to return, about all the men who had believed so deeply in honor that they had sacrificed everything for it. "I do not know if I was brave," he told her honestly, "but I chose to come home. And because of that choice, you are here. So perhaps that is its own kind of courage." The child did not fully understand, but she smiled and hugged him, and in that moment, Yamamoto felt something he had not felt since that terrible day in the Burmese jungle, when he had faced the impossible choice between honor and life. He felt peace. Like, comment, and subscribe to support this channel and help us bring more untold stories from World War II. What do you think about Sergeant Yamamoto's choice? Let us know in the comments below.